In 2005, a country called Ivory Coast was at war with itself. Two armies split along the middle of the country. 3 years into a fight that had killed people, displaced hundreds of thousands, and divided the nation in half. Then a footballer picked up a microphone. What he said next was one of the most powerful peace pleas. Hi, this is Cyrus Fernando with FNTG, From Nothing to Glory, which finds a human side within the story. Ivory Coast had been one of the most richest countries in West Africa. It had cacao, it had oil, it had a coastline. It also had a problem that football could not fix on its own. In September 2002, fighting broke out between the South and the North. The South was held by the army and the government. The North was held by rebel forces. The country was split along the line that ran through its middle. The fight was about the identity, citizenship, and political control. People in the North, many of them Muslim, were being told they were not really Ivorian. Documents were demanded. Voters with the wrong family history were excluded. Politicians from the North were locked out of elections. Then the guns came out. By the end of 2002, the United Nations was warning that hundreds of thousands of people had already been displaced. Some later accounts placed the total above 1 million. Roads had been blocked. Whole towns in the north had been cut off from the south. Soldiers stopped buses at checkpoints and asked for papers. The wrong papers got people pulled off the bus. Some never came back. The country had a name for the dividing line, and it was called the Zone of Confidence. It was meant to be peaceful, but in reality, it was where two armies waited. By 2005, the war had been going on for 3 years. Talks had broken down. Elections had been delayed. The line dividing the country was still there. In the middle of all this was a football team. The Ivory Coast national side had players from every part of the country. Christian and Muslim, North and South. They lived together, ate together, and played together when their country could not. Kolo Toure, born in Bouaké. Yaya Toure, his brother, born in the same rebel-held northern city. Aruna Dindane from the centre. Kalou from the south coast. Eboué from Abidjan. The team's captain, Cyril Dumaroud, was a senior figure who had been holding the dressing room together for years. The team looked like the country was supposed to look. Some of the biggest names were from a city the Southern Army no longer controlled. The striker who would do the talking was Didier Drogba. He was already playing in England for Chelsea. He had been African Footballer of the Year material for years. The shirt that mattered most to him was the orange one. Ivory Coast had never been to a World Cup, not once. 76 years of football and no qualification. The 2006 qualifiers came down to a final round of matches. Cameroon 1 point ahead of Ivory Coast at the top of the group. Both teams played on the same day. Ivory Coast were away in Sudan and Cameroon were at home against Egypt. The match was at Al Mariq Stadium in Omdurman, just across the river from Khartoum. Heat, dust, and a pitch that was not made for fast football. Ivory Coast won the game 3-1. In the other match, Cameroon were drawing with Egypt deep into stoppage time. Then Cameroon got a penalty. The the whole tournament was hanging on a kick. The Cameroonian player was Plea. Wome hit the post. The match ended a draw and Ivory Coast had qualified. This is where most football stories end. Qualify, celebrate, and cut to the World Cup. This is not what happened in Omdurman, because while the players were celebrating, one of them was thinking about something else. He was thinking about a country that even on a night like this was still at war. What he did next changed the national mood. Cyril Doumaroud, the senior captain figure inside that squad, called the Ivorian press into the dressing room. The journalists thought they were getting quotes about the win. They thought it would be a quick celebration interview. Then Doumaroud handed the microphone to Drogba. What followed was a plea. Drogba looked into that camera. His face was steady. His teammates stood behind him with their orange shirts. Some still had a sweat on their faces from the match.
Ivorians.
Ivoiriens, du nord et du sud, du centre à l'ouest. Vous avez vu, on vous a prouvé aujourd'hui que toute la Côte d'Ivoire peut cohabiter, peut jouer ensemble pour un même objectif, se qualifier pour le mondial.
Men and women of the Ivory Coast from north, south, centre and west, we prove today that all Ivorians can coexist and play together with a shared objective, which is to qualify for the World Cup. Then he dropped to his knees, the whole team with him. Christian players, Muslim players from every part of the country was still bleeding. They put their hands together in front of them. Some of them were close to tears and said, "We promised you that the celebration would unite the people. Today, we beg you, please, on our knees, forgive, forgive, forgive." And he kept going. The one country in Africa with so many riches must not descend into war like this. Please lay down all weapons, hold elections, organize elections. All will be better. The players started to sing. The chant went out across the Ivorian television. We want to have fun, so stop firing your guns. That message was carried into homes on both sides of the line. Government soldiers heard it. Rebel soldiers heard it. They were hearing the same words from the same team about the same country. The speech did not end the war that night. What it did was give peace a public symbol. In Abidjan, in the south, people called bars in the rebel-held north and told the customers they were to put their drinks on a southern bill. That had not even happened in 3 years. The national mood shifted. Politicians who had ignored peace, pressure, and now had a moment they could not pretend never happened. The political timeline is worth tackling. October 2005, the dressing room speech. Months of pressure followed on government and the rebels to come back to the table. In March 2007, the two sides signed a Ouagadougou agreement in Burkina Faso. Rebel leader Guillaume Soro became prime minister. The framework for ending the war was now on paper. Drogba was not finished. In March 2007, he flew to Bouaké, the rebel-held city in the north. He brought his African Player of the Year trophy with him. He also brought an idea. He wanted Ivory Coast to play an international match in Bouaké, the capital of the rebel north, a city that had not seen a national team game in 5 years, a city most Southerners had not set foot in since the war started. He met President Laurent Gbagbo first. Drogba was better. the same ethnic group as Gbagbo. He used that connection to ask the president to allow the match. He then flew north and met Soro. He told both men the team would play there. The match would be a 2008 Africa Cup of Nations qualifier against Madagascar. The date was June 3rd, 2007. Bouaké had been the headquarters of the rebellion since 2002. For 5 years, the national team had not set foot there. The stadium had been silent. The road in had been controlled by checkpoints. Now, the country's biggest names were arriving to play a competitive international match on rebel ground. Government soldiers and rebel troops stood inside the same stadium for the first time since the war began. 200 from the government side, 300 from the rebel side. They had spent 5 years pointing weapons at each other. Now, they were sharing a security detail. 25,000 fans from both halves of the country sat in the stands. The match was being broadcast nationally. Anyone who could find a television was watching. Ivory Coast won 5-0. Solomon Kalou, Yaya Toure, born in Bouaké, scored on home ground. Aruna Kone got a brace. Drogba added the last goal late on, rounding the keeper and sliding it into an empty net. Fans ran onto the pitch. Rebel troops shook hands with government troops. Some of them had been shooting at each other a year earlier. The next day, Ivorian newspaper ran headlines that read 5 goals to erase 5 years of war. This was the moment football became a real peace event, not just a dressing room plea. For the first time since the war began, the country had a single image of itself that everyone could agree on. Most people remember the goals. Few people remember what happened in that same stadium weeks later. In late July 2007, President Gbagbo and rebel leader Soro met in Bouaké. They walked into the stadium together. Then, on the same pitch where Ivory Coast had played Madagascar, they lit a fire. Soldiers from both sides threw their weapons into it. The stadium where the football match had been was now a place where the war was being publicly burned. The ceremony was called a flame of peace. Weapons were burned in public. Soldiers from the army and the rebels stood next to each other. The fire burned for hours. People who had spent the war hiding from soldiers came out to watch the soldiers disarm. The stadium in Bouaké was renamed. It was no longer just a sports ground. It became known as a stadium of peace. A spokesman for the Ivorian Ministry of Sport said something at the time that stayed in the country's memory. He said that what Drogba and his teammates had done in Bouaké was bigger peace effort than anything the politicians and intellectuals had managed. That was the government itself, and on record, telling the country that the players had moved peace forward in a way the politicians had not. Football did not replace politics. It made peace emotionally possible before politicians made it official. The war was not perfectly over. Ivory Coast would face another major political crisis in 2010 and 2011, when a disputed presidential election triggered a fresh outbreak of fighting. The original civil war, the army against the rebels, the South against the North, the military structure that had cut the country in two from 2002 had been broken. Neither match nor speech ended the war on its own. What the players gave the country was a reason to talk again, in a language both sides understood. At the exact moment, peace needed an image. People sometimes ask, why Drogba never went into politics.
And one day, in that far distant moment when you give up football, would you go home? Would you perhaps one day live a political life? Might you run for president?
No, I'm not going to run for president. No. I think when I stop playing, I would be happy to go back to my country and see that things have been better, you know, and people are really able to live together and forgive what happened, and we're going for a different Ivory Coast.
He was asked about it in many times. His answer was always the same. If he chose a party, half of the country would stop listening. By staying outside politics, he stayed inside the conversation. That is why the speech worked, and why the Bouaké match worked too. He held no political office. He spoke as the most recognizable face in the team they all watched. When he spoke, both sides heard the same words at the same time. When the team played in Bouaké, both sides watched the same image at the same time. A football match cannot stop a war by itself. It needs people willing to use the moment for something bigger than the score. In October 2005 and again in June 2007, that is what the Ivory Coast team did. They turned a dressing room into a national broadcast and a stadium into a meeting place for two armies. The country was still poor. The political problems were still there. The 2010 crisis was still coming. And in the middle of all of that, a divided country had been given one shared image at the exact moment peace needed one. The next generation of Ivorian children grew up knowing the team that did it. That is what football can do when the right people pick up the right microphone on the right night in front of the right country. In the next video, we're covering more football moments that meant more than just a result. And before you go, grab the free Smart Fan Toolkit in the description. Everything you need to plan your World Cup. It's free and the link is down below. If you want to understand the tactical side of how underdog nations beat more powerful teams at World Cups, FTG Intel has a full breakdown. You can click it on your screen right now. So here is the question. Can football still do this today? Or was Drogba's moment, the speech, the match in Bouaké and the soldiers in the same stadium impossible to repeat? Tell me down below. I'm Cyrus Fernando. This is FNTG, from nothing to glory. And I'll see you on the next video.